And before we go any further, let me acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Bidjigal and Gadjigal people of the Eora Nation, and we pay our deepest respects to elders past and present. So this is a very exciting topic tonight, the secrets of super-aging. And I was quite keen to identify myself as a super-ager, but I'm failing because one of the things I didn't realise is that it only applies to people once they're 80 plus. So I'm not that close. But I don't know, do we have anybody in the room tonight that might be closer to 80? Okay. Graham, of course. And, all right, well, in the course of tonight then, you're going to find out whether you qualify as a super-ager already, or in fact, how to get on that super-ager highway. And I think that's something we would all like to do. All right. As I said, when I started to research this, it hadn't dawned on me actually that super-aging is a new phenomenon. And the reason for that may be obvious to you, but we're living so much longer. So actually this is an emerging field of science and a brand new one. Now that in Australia we're expected to live well into our 80s and even maybe into our hundreds, found out today actually that the oldest person in Australia is now 111, and then there's also 112. I forget which is the man and which is the woman, but anyway, material. So how we age is becoming so important. And most of the existing research has been carried out on people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, which is why I say this is literally a brand new field. But I learned that the definition of super-ager is people in their 80s who maintain levels of capacity comparable to those who are 20 or 30 years younger. So that's a goal, a great goal for us all to aspire to. So now I'm going to call Professor Matthew Kiernan, our Neura CEO, up to enlighten us all. Okay, so Matthew, super-aging has got many different dimensions, but cognitive super-aging is obviously the gold standard. And I learned this is typically measured by memory tests, memory performance. What sort of test does this mean?
Well, it's quite a wide-ranging series of tests, but as you say, very much orientated on memory, but not just memory, it's also brain agility, brain health, coordination. So it's a whole series of tasks. And usually we incorporate it with a clinical neuropsychologist who does, assessments of, words, thinking through tasks. And we could do some of them now. For instance, we might ask someone, this is verbal fluency, to list all of the words that they can think of that begin with the letter L. And you can quickly do it in your mind. And typically you should get above 13 or 14 words in that minute. And this is verbal fluency, which is a test of your frontal lobe, which is your executive function of the brain. So these are approaches that we use at a clinical basis, but I think now we're getting into much more refined technology, scans, coordination tests. So that's giving us a lot more information about the brain, but then also the related functions, for instance, cardiovascular function, fitness, mental agility. And this is all putting parts of the jigsaw together to understand our trajectory. And I think everyone who's in this room is clearly on the super highway because you're doing a new task. You're coming to hear about the brain function, and you'll probably learn different things tonight. And that's going to make you think over the next few days. And maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. And this is the sort of the questioning that your brain is doing, and that's the sort of the fitness testing that we need to encourage and undertake through the course of our lives. If we do the same thing over and over again, obviously the brain gets bored, we get bored, and that's usually the process then that leads to decline, slowing down, not just cognitively, but cognitively and physically.
I remember when Professor Ray Dolan was out here last year from London.
Yep.
From London, he was telling, the thing that really stuck in my mind was he said, you have to do something different to build new neural pathways.
Yeah, and he encouraged everyone to find a new path home every night. And oftentimes, preferably to the same home and the same bed, but it might be even better if you go somewhere else. But But he was actually really good, and he said, like, in London, he often takes different tubes and cars and bicycles through to get home, and I think that's a good way to think. And I was speaking to another person recently, Mark Boris, and he said, like, he does the same route home, and he can't even remember taking the left turn and the right turn anymore. And then he's starting to wonder, did he have a seizure on the way home? But because he's done the same thing over and over again the same way, he can't recall it.
I think I remember reading also the balance of activity versus sleep is important too.
And we're starting now to understand much more about the brain. And one of the key areas is what's called the glymphatic system. And it was only really discovered in 2014. And the glymphatic system is the way that the fluid of the brain is passed through a reservoir, and all of the proteins that are built up in the 24 hours before are cleared out. And the glymphatic system only activates when you're in your deepest sleep, so REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And you need to get 2 bursts of REM sleep a night for the glymphatic system to work. If the glymphatic system doesn't work, then proteins like tau and amyloid build up, and they're the proteins that precipitate cognitive issues like Alzheimer's disease. I suppose what we're not really sure about is whether and when people have cognitive problems, they have sleep disturbance. And we're not sure what's the primary mover. Is it the cognitive problem causing the sleep disturbance, or is it the lack of sleep and the lack of activation of the glymphatic system causing the cognitive problems? But that's the first measure. Sleep hygiene is incredibly important. We can, often when you see your general practitioner, they'll give you various things that you need to think about. So doing physical exercise, making sure when you go to bed that you're tired, and that you fall asleep. Avoid, these are just generalisations, but avoid, caffeine products just before you go to sleep. If you can't fall asleep, give it, 20 minutes or 30 minutes and just get up and walk around, and then do other tasks and try to go to sleep. But you can see there's a science developing about how best to manage sleep for brain function.
Something else I found really interesting in my reading, which I touched on before, is there isn't just one type of super-ager. As I said, there's multiple points of entry to that super-ager highway. However, there are characteristics that all super-agers share. So I guess this is the secrets part. And they sound kind of obvious, so I'm going to ask Matthew to sort of unpack them for us. But the characteristics they all share are as follows: a positive and open outlook, being lifelong learners, being exceptionally curious, those two sort of go together, and also social connection. Their connections are not many, as you might expect probably at that time of life, but they're deep and meaningful. So Matthew, what is the impact of those characteristics on the brain? Because they actually do change the brain.
Yeah, social connection is incredibly important for the brain. And in fact, the Lancet Commission last year came out with 45% of dementia is modifiable through risk factor management. And one of the key risk factors is social engagement. And that also includes your mood as well. So mood disturbance can lead to, withdrawal from a community. And that, again, these are issues that can promote cognitive decline. The basis of the social engagement is also then back to some of the other points you raised, like curiosity. And, I was actually speaking to Anna Katzman earlier on, and she said she's going to Italy and she's looking forward to going to the opera. And it's all these sort of it's the curiosity, it's the change of environment. It's you can almost, as you hear these sort of things, you can hear your brain humming, like it's getting into a zone. And I think that's the critical part. They are all intertwined from that social environment perspective. Then linked to that is a sort of the medical risk factors. So, for instance, blood pressure, cholesterol. We're understanding that the brain is very much a vascular organ, and the more that you can, again, for super-aging, the more that you can supercharge and modify your vascular risk factors, the better in the long term. Linked to that, obviously, avoidance of smoking, low alcohol intake, ideally no alcohol, but I can't encourage that too much this evening. But these are the things that's part of the jigsaw coming together.
I'm going to have to read these because these are terms that I'm not going to understand, but you will. But I read from imaging, the brains of super-agers, there are really clear and distinct differences that show up. For example, less brain shrinkage than, a normal ager, but also enhancements like this makes me sound very intelligent, a thicker anterior cingulate cortex.
Absolutely. So there are parts of the brain that are critically important. The most critical part for humans are the frontal lobe, and that's our executive function. So if you have any animals at home, like dogs and cats, if you have a look at them, they don't have any forehead, so they don't have any frontal lobe function. Then we know that there's a part of neurology called Hebbian theory after Donald Hebb, and he basically said that cells that fire together wire together. So the more that you can get networks of cells firing off, and that is done through new networks, new thinking, new curiosity approaches. And activity in the brain is associated with healthy brain cells. This is at a microscopic level. And then, unhealthy brain activity is associated with reduction in size, atrophy or shrinkage, but also replacement of normal brain tissue by abnormal proteins, so particularly amyloid and tau. But I think it's important to say, even if those processes happen in your brain, then it's not inevitable that you're going to have cognitive decline or dementia. And there was really a fantastic study that was undertaken in the 1980s in America, in Minnesota, and it was called the Religious Order Study. And I think the most illustrative case is Sister Mary. So the background to the study is that all religious orders agreed to undergo cognitive assessments, and then when they passed away, they'd undergo post-mortem examination. And so Rush University was doing these cognitive assessments, and Sister Mary was 102, had a cognitive assessment and scored, through the roof, and unfortunately died a few months later. And then her brain underwent post-mortem examination, and it was full of tau and amyloid. So pathologically, she had Alzheimer's disease. But just before she died, she'd scored incredibly well in terms of the cognitive function. So why is that so? Well, it turned out that Sister Mary had been a very active person in the order. She was the mentor, she was bringing people through, and she was teaching, all the way through. So she was challenging her brain. So we know that even if you have full-blown Alzheimer's disease, you can function normally if you continue to exercise and train the brain, look after your modifiable risk factors. So that's an important message to take home. These things aren't inevitable. And you can modify outcomes through the course of your life. So it's good that there aren't too many 80-year-olds, because it means that lots of the 40s, 50s, 60-year-olds can keep that training going. The 80-year-olds have already established it. They're in fantastic shape. They've come tonight. So I think that these are the messages to take home.
Well, that kind of starts to answer my next question, which is the characteristic that super-agers do not share is that they are not necessarily free of disease, dementia or other. They don't have absence of risk of those diseases. They may even carry genetic risk factors for those diseases, have family members affected, but they don't get it. Why?
And I think that's why places like Neura are around, because we really need to understand the interactions of genetics, environment, pathology. And one of the key fields moving forward is epigenetics. So we can modify the genes and the cellular processes through the environment. And we know from very bad studies in the past that environment, pollution, living, mining, all of these sort of things are associated with worse health outcomes. So I think that we need to focus on that, and we've got a huge, brain bank here, so 3,500 people have generously donated brains with their full clinical history, all of the biomarkers, and we need to study not only the pathological processes, but what might have protected them in life to give them better outcomes. And this is relatively unexplored, and I think this is what the community wants us to do, and obviously to tackle the key issues like Alzheimer's disease, mental health disturbance, but we need to also then focus on ways to improve outcomes, and I think epigenetics is a fantastic opportunity, and the neuroscientists working here at Neura are really focusing on those approaches.
So we should touch on the notion of cognitive reserve. Does that come into play as well as a protective factor?
That does. And so again, the Lancet Commission showed that educational attainment is important in terms of warding off dementia. So at a global level, we need to be encouraging greater levels of education. But then that education doesn't stop at school or university or, training through your careers. But obviously, maybe we should all get on the jumbo with Anna and go to Italy and learn Italian. But these are the things that we should try to aspire to. And I think the education is critically important. The other part of that discussion is that, if you are incredibly, high achieving and thinking a lot, it's very hard to work out whether there has been any deterioration. So whether you drop down from 100% to 99.9%, that's not going to be, noticeable. And so the cognitive reserve is incredibly important and useful. And again, it's something that we can all work on and achieve.
So the last characteristic that super-agers all share is resilience. There's a lot of, talk about that, but I thought Matthew might enlighten us as to the neuroscience of resilience and what is its effect on the brain.
Well, I think we're very lucky tonight that we're going to have two other neuroscientists come here, and they're going to talk about particularly their fields in pain and balance and falls, and these are all parts of the makeup of resilience. And to come up with a simple definition of resilience, I wish I could, but I think we're starting to learn that we know the brain is resilient, and we know that the brain can be altered through training. But again, what are the characteristics that promote resilience? Well, I think overall, that's probably the next 5 years of research here at Neura.
Okay, and a delicate question, this one, but I think one that needs to be asked. I'm going to assume that amongst our First Nations peoples, super-aging is not a thing, given that they have a lower life expectancy and a 3 to 5 times higher rate of dementia, and yet elders play such an important role in those communities. Can you tell us what Neura's doing about that?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right, Carole. The life expectancy of our First Nations people is much lower, and obviously a lot of these conditions are age-related, so they increase as you age. I think there have been visionary neuroscientists here at Neura, particularly Tony Bro and Kylie Radford, and they established a longitudinal study to look at healthy ageing in First Nations individuals. So it was called the Koori Old Age Well Study. And that has been using community awareness to study Indigenous cognitive function. And so it's particularly through the north coast of New South Wales and through rural communities. They've been coming to Neura, so they've been engaged and interested in the program through the elders. And so particularly Uncle Terry Donovan, who was awarded an Order of Australia last year, who has helped pioneer this program to get community involvement. The community are coming here, undergoing cognitive assessments, and we're starting to, understand the processes of cognitive function and dysfunction. And we know clearly that lifestyle is important, and that includes blood pressure, cholesterol, body mass index, alcohol intake, smoking. So there's public health and awareness campaigns, but then we need to know, are there specific challenges or conditions or processes that affect First Nations people? And I think Neura is a long way ahead of any other sort of institution in Australia. They took this on very early, and I think it's a credit to those scientists.
I was reflecting, and I'm sure you all did also, on the US presidential election, which of course is past us now, but I think that really thrust ageing and cognitive performance, those issues, into sharp relief. If we think that Australians are living an average 30 years longer now than a century ago, and the number of 85-plus-year-olds is expected to double by 2042. So some of us will be super-agers, and the rest of us will aspire to being successful agers. And there is a difference. It's a different concept. So I'm going to ask Associate Professor Daina Sturnieks and Dr. Aidan Cashin to join us at this point. back to Matthew for a moment, and then I'll introduce you both properly. What's the difference then between super aging and successful aging?
I could say choosing your parents correctly, but I think being successful aging, I suppose, is back to the curiosity issue and having, I suppose, goals to aim for and achievements that you find personally rewarding. I think that the other bit that you mentioned is that, like, if you are born in Sydney today, in the eastern suburbs around Randwick, your average life expectancy is 102 today. So that means in that course of time, we don't know that 102 will probably turn out to be 110, 115, 120 years in the course of their lifetime. So I think we all have to now provide some degree of mentorship to make sure that we all and the next generations can have successful aging. And I think, you know, it's a very lucky time that we're all alive. Like, the technologies are here. We know, I mean, cardiovascular disease and stroke in Australia are going down. In the field of neurology, the only other thing I'd say is, when you choose to retire close to a network where there's a place to come, a major teaching hospital. So everyone goes to the north coast or the south coast and they have a stroke and it's a catastrophic outcome. But if you live close to a hospital that drains to, say, Prince of Wales or Royal Prince Alfred or Royal Melbourne Hospital, you know, clot retrieval, which is partly an Australian invention, so acute stroke, putting a coil, a guide wire up and pulling a blood clot out. It's just amazing transformation from someone who is completely paralysed, can't speak, and then walks out of hospital 2 days later with no deficit. So I think these are the technological advances that we're seeing in the community, and you can imagine what's going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years.
So maybe super aging is plan A and successful aging is plan B, something like that. All right, now let me introduce Daina and Aidan properly. So Daina is a conjoint senior research scientist at Neura and an associate professor in anatomy at UNSW Medicine. She has a PhD in human biomechanics and is focused on novel interventions to prevent falls. And Aidan is deputy director of the Centre for Pain Impact at Neura and a conjoint senior lecturer in the School of Health Sciences. You look far too young for that. But anyway, he is a star. He is an accredited exercise physiologist with a focus on healthcare interventions to improve management of chronic pain. So obviously both very relevant for successful aging. So Daina, how critical is mobility to successful aging?
I'd say it's very important to successful aging. If you can mobilise safely, you can be physically active, you can be socially active, like we've heard, and you can maintain your cognitive function. So they're all intertwined, they're all connected. So
and you can be independent, right?
You can be independent. So obviously navigating your environment safely, being able to mobilise, enables you to stimulate your body physically, through exercise, but also your brain. And if your brain's healthy, then your body's more likely to be healthy. And if your body's healthy, your brain's more likely to be healthy.
Yeah, so it's all connected. So let's talk about, this is something I learned when I first came to Neura, and I was fascinated to learn it because I had no idea of the impact of falls in Australia and the impact of falls on morbidity and mortality. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Falls are a real problem in our country and many countries around the world. So it's a leading cause of injury-related hospitalisations in older people. And generally that definition is over the age of 65. So if someone's had a injurious fall, it will impact their, much more likely to impact their life. For example, 5 times more likely to be admitted to nursing home than someone with similar sort of physical and other sort of demographic factors. So 5 times more likely to be admitted to nursing home if you've had an injurious fall. And that just reflects on the impact on someone's life and in their independence, their ability to live independently and have a quality of life that we all hope to have in living independently. But even a non-injurious fall, so someone might fall and not have an injury, that can also impact on the way we live our lives. Often people will lose a little bit of confidence and they therefore will start to avoid activities. They might therefore decondition, and then we sort of set ourselves up on this spiralling effect, which unfortunately is the opposite to successful ageing.
It was interesting, actually, to share a little personal story. I recently had my first fall. Typically, I slip and trip and recover. I was extremely lucky. I didn't hurt myself other than, a couple of bruises and scratches, but it certainly knocked my confidence. So don't do what I did. I was wearing thongs. I was walking around Bondi Junction. I was looking at my phone, and needless to say, my foot caught on a bit of raised pavement, and I went flying. And as I said, I was very lucky not to hurt myself, but it shook me a lot. So it made me think also about, I know that there's a multiplicity of systems in the body that have to kick in instantaneously when you slip so that you recover and don't fall. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, it's many systems. It's quite a complex system to maintain our balance. We all do it relatively easily, but it is quite a challenging thing to do, especially in that scenario there when you have milliseconds with which to respond. So we've done a lot of work to understand the sensory, so understanding what we see and feel, and the motor, so our ability to move. Those systems, sensory and motor systems, we know a lot about their contributions to balance, but we're also starting to understand much better cognitive functions or neurocognitive or neural brain functions and their contributions to balance and avoiding falls, as well as psychological processes, including the associations with anxiety and depression. So these other factors are now starting to be better understood, so we can put the puzzle together a little bit. Falls are a really multifactorial problem. So in that situation where you experienced a trip or a slip, you had to feel that you felt that you were tripping, where your body was going, which direction, how fast. Your brain had to receive all that information. It had to make sense of it because we get it from multiple sources, from our eyes and our limbs and our feet. And then your brain had to think, what do I need to do about this to correct myself and establish a plan of movement and then enact that plan appropriately with the right muscles turned on, the right magnitude, to have an appropriate step in order to catch yourself and not fall. So all that had to happen within a split second, really. So there's a lot going on. There's not a lot of time to do it. So you can imagine that all those systems need to be really finely tuned in order to be successful in avoiding falls.
Clearly, in that instance, my systems failed. But we'll do better next time. So, Daina, I know you've developed a novel intervention called Smart Step. And interestingly, you conducted part of your research and development in Ality, as they were known then, aged care homes. Can you tell us about Smart Step and what results you've achieved?
Yeah, sure. So the good news for you, Carole, is that exercise, we know, can prevent falls. So if you do exercise, you are more likely to recover or avoid the trip in the first place. So there's good news. And so Smart Step is an exergame. And it was designed because we knew exercise can prevent falls. There's good evidence for it. And there's this emerging evidence that cognitive exercise or brain training can help with balance functions that might be important for fall avoidance. And so we designed this physical and cognitive training exergame to essentially see if we could prevent falls. And the other reason we designed it as an exergame was not only because you can combine the physical and the cognitive challenges, but it's fun. And the trouble with exercise is that even though we know it's good for us, we're not very good at doing it and keeping it up. And so if you're playing a game, the idea is that you're having fun and you're not thinking about the exercise and time flies when you're having fun, right? So you get the exercise done without it being a burden. So we designed this exergame program. We sent it out to people living in the community. 750 people over the age of 65 are involved in this trial. and we found a fall prevention benefit of about 26%, which is a great outcome. We also had a subgroup, a third of them were doing just cognitive training. So they were playing the same games, but at a computer, just playing these brain games. And we also found some benefit of that too. So it seemed to be effective in people who had had a previous fall or people who were having multiple falls. So that was really nice new evidence that there's some transfer of cognitive training to physical functions. We've known for a while now that physical training can transfer to cognitive or brain health.
It sounds like the ideal is the combination that you designed, right?
That's right. And to get to your point about Ality, so Ality is aged care facility, a range of facilities across Australia that we rolled the systems out in those homes across Australia so that the residents could be more, not only physically active, but they really wanted their residents to be more socially active and engaged. And we're doing some more work now with other rehabilitation facilities and other ways to get this system out into the community and clinical practice.
Okay, thank you, Daina. I'll turn to Aidan now. So, Aidan, chronic pain. What's the prevalence of chronic pain in Australia, and why is its management key to successful ageing?
Chronic pain, for those unfamiliar, is a really common problem. 1 in 5 Australians will suffer from chronic pain, and that's the same worldwide. So if you look around the room, at least one person in our row here would be reporting chronic pain at any one time. The reason it's problematic, I guess, for us to successfully age is that it's not that just that it's common, it has a debilitating impact on our quality of life. It affects an individual's mood, an individual's ability to contribute to society in a workplace setting, but also in a social engagement, as we've heard about already, which is critical for healthy ageing. And on a societal level, it costs our economy over $160 billion each year. Data from the US suggests that over a 10-year period that healthcare spending was highest for chronic pain, particularly low back pain, against any other chronic condition, so including diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, or cancer. So it is a real problem for us and for our societies.
So what kinds of chronic pain does your centre focus on?
So at the centre here at Neura, we're interested in all types of chronic pain. We don't try to rule anything out, but we have a particular focus on chronic low back pain, primarily because it's the most common type of chronic pain that anyone will experience, and it's also one of the most debilitating forms for our workforce and our ability to contribute to life as we age. But we also do research on more rare pain conditions which have previously been underserved. At Neura here, we're implementing some really innovative trial designs where we can recruit rare conditions previously not ever treated or seen across Australia, all from trials we're running here at our hub. So we're treating conditions such as phantom limb pain, which are quite rare but debilitating. So this is pain you experience in a limb that's missing, as well as conditions such as complex regional pain syndrome, which have real profound impacts on people's lives.
And chronic pain is a huge problem in low to middle income countries. Why is that?
Yeah, this is a great question, and unfortunately it's a billion-dollar question that we don't have the exact answers to. But as you can imagine, with any problem, it's never one solution that we can address. At the centre here, we're really trying to work towards addressing this problem. One of our research fellows is driving a global network to try and understand what are some of the key features occurring in the low to middle income countries, particularly this idea that maybe it's some of our Western ways being inappropriately transcribed to those settings. So at Neura here, we have a particular focus, not just helping those in Australia, but those who maybe aren't able to, as big resourced as we are, to support them.
And I guess one of the real challenges there is to come up with interventions that are scalable, because you've got much bigger populations in those countries, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other challenges we're having with trying to develop effective interventions is the lack of understanding of what actually drives pain, and particularly what causes it to continue. So here at Neura, we've been building on some of our foundational neuroscience research to really underpin or investigate what are some of these key mechanisms. And here we're trying to identify what are the targets, then how can we develop, as you said so nicely, a scalable intervention package that any clinician around the world could implement on a feasible setting. So
let's talk about some of your trials. For example, the Resolve trial for low back pain. I found this fascinating because tell me if I have this right, but the concept is that you don't treat pain at the site of pain, you treat it in the brain, and you treat it with a number of modalities. How does it work?
Yeah, that's I think an accurate depiction, but it also highlights some of the challenges we see in the pain space. I think there's been this evolution in how we understand pain, and it's really starting to become quite clear that a key driver of pain is our nervous system and our brain, as is all our experiences. And maybe our treatment should be focused more generally beyond just the periphery of our body. And I guess our treatment is really trying to acknowledge that people are more than just their tissues, particularly in the backs, they're more than just their back. We actually have to get at some of the key drivers, which are changes in the nervous system. So our intervention really tries to provide a three-pronged approach to that. We try to help the person better understand what pain is and what their problem is all about, understand these more contemporary pain science information. We try to change the way the brain and the back communicate with each other through a variety of sensory motor retraining tasks. Then we try to get the person moving, because we know movement's important for recovery, but also for engagement in meaningful lifestyle activities. So using this combination of these three elements, we're able to start to show quite impressive changes for people's quality of life, but particularly reductions in pain and disability.
Do you have results on that trial yet in terms of kind of data?
Yeah, so the trial itself was completed here at Neura a few years ago, and I was actually one of the trial clinicians working on the trial as well as my PhD project. So what we found, and we compared our intervention to a really well-designed control to really make sure that what we found was potentially a true result or a really valid result. So we found that those engaged in the intervention reduced their pain and disability for up to 1 year at a threshold which we meant was clinically meaningful. So it was a more than 40% change in their experience, which was sustained. And for us, that might not seem incredibly impressive, but for the pain field, anything which is sustained beyond 3 months was a revolution. So what we were able to show that it wasn't just when you're doing something, you felt better. After you've done it, that benefit was sustained for up to a year. So our work here has really driven, I guess, a new movement alongside some other colleagues in the US and some other groups in Sydney to develop these more brain-centric or brain-focused comprehensive interventions which are producing meaningful change.
Thanks, Aidan. So obviously, retaining mobility, retaining the ability or growing the ability to slip and trip and recover, and the ability to manage chronic pain, all key to both successful ageing and super-ageing. I'll just go back to Matthew to wrap this up before we turn it over to you and open the floor for questions. Matthew, can you quickly just summarise then the secrets of super-ageing, successful ageing for us all? Make sure we retain it.
Absolutely. Before we get into super-ageing, I think that the key message from both Daina and Aidan is the role of exercise. And we know that exercise can be used to improve mobility. It's very effective in terms of management of chronic pain, and it's incredibly important for brain function in general. So ideally, 20 minutes a day, aerobic type exercise such that your heart rate increases or you become short of breath. And this is really driving a whole process. And on the converse of that process is a concept of frailty. And frailty has just sort of really it's been defined, and it's a field of research in its own right. And we always thought that frailty was the end stage of a process, and frailty is associated with cognitive decline. We know that you can ward off frailty. How do you do that? Well, you do it through resistance training. So the more resistance training you can do in your 70s, 80s, 90s, 100, that's critically important. Next to that is high protein diet. So if you can have 45 grams of protein a day associated with resistance training, you're going to drive the brain, but also, mitigate against these processes. So you're going to avoid frailty, you can have better brain health and better brain outcomes. In terms of the other keys for super aging, other than, resistance training, high protein diet, looking at the modifiable risk factors. So having a good general practitioner who's going to look after your blood pressure, monitor your cholesterol, aggressively treat your cholesterol, have your blood sugar levels looked at, body mass index, have a healthy body mass index, which also leads to improved sugar control, less insulin resistance, be socially engaged. If you're prone to mood disturbance, actively treat depression, live in a nice environment, go on holidays to Italy, learn a new language, take a different route home from work, choose good friends and family, and look, I think that's the key.
Sounds simple, right? Okay, can I now please invite questions, comments, wisdom from our audience members?
Sorry, I'd just like to hear more about the studies that have been done and what you observed in the process that led to those conclusions. And I'm interested to know what the games are that one can play to minimise the risk of slipping and falling.
Sure. So a lot of our evidence that was used to develop our interventions came from studies that we did where we would test a whole lot of functions of our participants, so physical functions, including sensory and motor functions, cognitive functions, lifestyle factors, medical factors. And then we'd collect all this data and we send everyone home to live their lives, but to tell us every month whether they'd had a fall. And then we found out which of those functions or which of those assessments at baseline were associated with an increased likelihood to fall. And so that's how we found certain things are particularly important for helping us to predict falls. So things like strength, balance, quick and accurate stepping was one of the things that then led to this exergame, which involves stepping on a mat. Certain brain functions, executive functions, not so much memory, but things like processing speed, attention, being able to shift your attention, visual spatial processing, these type of brain functions were important for predicting falls. And so we designed this game. It's an exergame. I didn't explain it very well, but you play games, it's projected onto a monitor and there's a stepping mat on the floor and it's wirelessly connected. And so we're asking people to step on the mat to interact with the game. And in doing that, they are challenging their balance, they're challenging their thinking skills to enable them to play well. And then with exercise, you always have to progress. So you get a little bit better, you've got to do a little bit more and a little bit more intense. And so the games were progressive. And as a result of that, over a 12-month period, we saw this nice reduction in falls. Now, it's not the first study to show that exercise can prevent falls. There's really good evidence for that. But it was nice in that it involved this cognitive training as well. And it was done with a fun game in people's homes safely. No one fell, no one hurt themselves in doing this. So that is an example of some of our research that led to the interventions that we're doing, and then more interventions now that we're doing in different clinical groups, including stroke, people who have lost sensation, peripheral neuropathy, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis.
Yes, thank you for your question and interest. Always excited to talk about these interventions. So a similar story to Daina in that the interventions were built from some of the foundational research that we did. We started to identify that people who had chronic low back pain looked a bit different to those who didn't in terms of the way their brains processed information, the way they moved, the way they interacted. And we're able to identify these as targets to then petition a particular intervention towards that. In our foundational work, we found they were useful, but they weren't sustained. So these new interventions combined all these elements. And the observations that we made along the way as we implemented this package were really that people found this new explanation for their problem, and the use of these interventions at first unusual, but incredibly validating for their experiences. Those with back pain often have been through, I'm going to use the word the ringer, in terms of seeing treatment professionals, having things explained which are actually inaccurate and somewhat harmful. We were able to validate their experiences as well as why things may not have worked. And as a result, as they went through the process, we saw real fantastic outcomes. We saw people in the intervention group were twice as likely to recover in the other group. And by recover, we don't just mean they had less pain, they had no pain, which is less common in pain trials. So this was a real exciting thing for us. We are now taking this intervention package and testing it in an implementation setting. So we have funding to roll this out into clinics around Australia to see if it continues to show benefit. We're also translating this package of care for different chronic pain conditions and also trying to work on different models. So can we provide it via telehealth to our rural and remote colleagues who aren't able to then provide the same care, and can we provide it in shorter increments? The intervention was tested over a 12-week block. Can we provide a shorter or a less titrated dose and still have the same benefits? So we've developed apps based with industry, which have kind of getting the same elements together, but being provided in a different way. No, it's a great question. So the intervention, and our research focus more generally is of non-drug interventions. So these are educational interventions, behavioural change, as well as this is, I wish I had a PowerPoint here to show you. We train the way people receive sensory information, so tactile information on their back, as well as how they move their body. And when we do these things, it sharpens up that communication between the back and the brain, which often becomes less clear or blurry as pain persists.
Other questions or comments?
So how do we, if somebody's suffering with chronic pain and they're feeling that they're not getting any answers from their GP or a specialist they might have been sent to, how do they get to you?
That's a great question. So I guess...
I ring up Matthew?
Definitely send an email to Neura and you'll get connected to our Centre for Pain Impact. And if we have an appropriate trial which is servicing a problem that you're reporting, we will connect you. And if we can't, we will find you a clinician who we view as someone who's practicing the more contemporary pain care. So definitely reach out to us. As a centre, we do many things. We try to focus on research discovery or knowledge discovery, but we also want research translation. So connecting research to people, such as yourself, is a key part of our drive, so we'd love to hear from you.
So, Matthew, if you had to say one thing that was, if there's a silver bullet that's going to make you a super-ager, what would it be? I think I've got what you might say.
Well, that's a very hard question because I want the full lot. But it would be exercise engagement would be the critical parts. And when I say that, I'd say resistance exercise. And I think we're seeing the approaches that Daina's introduced to, aged care facilities, communities, and that's had dramatic effects. So that's showing you the power. And I suppose just to put all of that into some sort of general idea, I mean, what we're focused on here, as Aidan said, is the community and then impact and engagement. So Daina's study was published in Nature Medicine, which is one of the highest impact journals in the world and has generated a lot of international interest. And then Aidan's work, this is under embargo, so you can't tell anyone, but he's been awarded an Emerging Leadership Fellowship from NH and MRC. So there's only about 2% around Australia, and Aidan is one of the well-deserved recipients. So real impact, and hopefully both of them will take this on and many more important studies coming through.
One more.
Hi, thanks very much for some very interesting information. Gets my curiosity going. I've got a slightly different question. If you think about people who are involved in who have back pain for which they take drugs like Lyrica, if you think about people who have depression that take perhaps venlafaxine, if you think about people that have who live in nursing homes where there is protection at all costs rather than encouragement to use what they've got, how do you overcome this? And should you be looking at things that help, drugs that give better sleep, or should you stand back from that and work in these more positive ways? It's a bit of a black and white question, but could you speak around that topic, please?
I can circle around with some grey in this question. It's a really important question. I think it highlights the complexity of the chronic pain space and the complexity as we change across age brackets, across situations, contexts. So the aged care setting is a particularly pertinent time. There's been a real aim for reform, particularly of pain management. a lot of work at the Australian Pain Society with colleagues of driving to improve medicine prescription, because at the moment it is a bit of the Wild West. So without giving medical advice, I think drugs or medicines can be used for different purposes. Sometimes they'll have tremendous results on pain, unfortunately not often, but they may have co-benefits that the prescriber has found as a useful surrogate. So as you said before, that maybe the sleeping effects are more important than having a huge impact on pain. So these are the conversations, I guess, you have with your prescriber. As long as you trust your team, your medical team that are looking out for you, I think. But there's a long way that we have to go in the pain space, and I guess groups like the and Neuroscience Research Australia is really driving a lot of these activities, trying to integrate the biomedical model with a contemporary neuroscience-informed approach.
Yeah, and just to follow up with that, some medications are, being on multiple medications can increase your risk of falls, and unfortunately a lot of people are on centrally acting types of medications, and so what Aidan said is to trust your medical team. You've really got to have regular medical reviews and reassess whether we do need to be on those specific drugs. What are they helping with, but what are the side effects? So the sleep medications will help someone to sleep, but they'll make them more likely to fall when they stand up because they're drowsy and they're affecting the central nervous system. So that's a challenge, and I think we just all need to be aware that we need to continually assess what medications we're on and our loved ones are on and have those conversations. Also, the aged care setting, it's an issue in that we need to challenge people in there rather than wrap them up in cotton wool and leave them in the chair. You'd never fall if you don't get out of the chair, right? But we need people to get out of the chair and also eat healthier, be more stimulated in these care homes as well as our own homes.
Thank you, everybody. That just about wraps up our time for brain food. But in closing, I'll just ask Mr. Lee Valentine to take the mic from me.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody for coming tonight. On behalf of the Neuro Foundation Board, thank you to our panellists. Very intriguing conversation there, and importantly for me, I got 5 things out of that, which is, firstly, I've got some dear friends here today that now know they're stuck with me until my 80s and 90s, so thank you very much for hanging out. From a game perspective, my wife plays this wonderful game with me in the dishwasher. So when you open the cutlery drawer, the cutlery's everywhere, and then I have to tidy it all up again and make sure it cleans. So that's working. I've got 3 teenage children, so that's testing my resilience every day. Thank you. And lastly, you talked about Sister Mary and a religion. My wife is my religion, so I think that counts as well. So all in all, I thought I was doing okay. So bring on the 80s. Thank you very much. But thank you very much for an intriguing conversation. I feel younger already, and thank you all for coming too.